Right, hello Wokingham voters. I've received an email from Clive Chafer who has told me that dear Wokingham candidates, as a group of Wokingham constituents have got together to determine which issues matters most to us as voters in the constituency at the general election. We have put these issues together as a series of 10 questions which I have attached. We would very much appreciate it if you would give a brief response to these questions, blah 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 blah. So, and I'll come down to the questions. Which is good, great. The whole reason I'm standing is for participation. The way I'm set up to allow the public to participate is they actually dictate the policies, but the people who dictate the policies will be a random sample of the public rather than 10 people who are politically motivated. Not saying that you have a political motivation or corruption, but Clive and his friends are politically minded people, and though I suspect I probably agree with them on pretty much everything. It won't be my choice though. Having said that, I would like to note that nobody's responded from the 31 people I've sent letters to attend my meeting. If you received a letter saying, come along to the meeting, if you can make it, the public meeting on the 30th of September at Shinfield Village Hall from 7:30 till 9:30 to choose our policies, then please do get back in touch with me. That won't be everybody I've just spoken to, just the people with the letters. I have their names. Right, so anyways, the first question, the NHS. The NHS is coming under increasing financial pressure. The NHS Chief Executive said that it needs £8 billion of extra funding each year going forward in order to deal with increased demand. Meanwhile, privatisation of services continues to be expanded. If you are a Woking MP, how would you handle the NHS in the future? Well, I agree entirely. I've mentioned before about my views on the NHS and how it will struggle. It will continue to struggle as we have an ageing population, and we have a population that is being spoon-fed cancer from the food suppliers and then sold expensive cancer treatments from the other end as well. So it's like both ends are going to become very expensive. I would like to see a lot more cancer research and NHS being national. I'd like to see the universities doing all their studies, then that information ending up with the government rather than being sold to private clinics and private pharmaceutical companies as things progress, because the figures being charged, at least in these countries, not in the developing world, obscene. For, when you're ultimately blackmailing against someone's life. Yes, we want these drugs to be developed, but I think there's now a certain calling for less shareholders getting money, and the same scientists who are working for modest money, to be honest, those same scientists and getting rid of the marketing team so much, and having those same scientists working but for their own salary, for the betterment of mankind, not for their own salary, for the betterment of shareholders and some chief execs. In terms of finding the 8 billion, well, there's plenty of ways of finding the 8 billion. It's interesting when we talk about, for example, John Redwood gave reference to when the capital gains tax was lower, they had more receipts. Well, of course, if you're somebody who's wealthy and most of your income is from capital gains, then what you do is when capital gains tax is high, you don't sell. And then when capital gains is low, then you sell at that point, or you do it through another company's ownership and pay no company tax. Seychelles, Malta, you just go and own things via a financial vehicle that doesn't pay capital gains. So in terms of what we have, the way we tax at the moment being capital gains on UK residents, so non-DOMs are getting away with it, but UK residents, local wealth that they choose to sell at a specific time, then yeah, you put the rates up, it's going to be less. I think a lot of most wealthy people make the lion's share of their gains through capital gains, not through working hard and earning it. So no, I would change the tax structure, and that £8 billion is just sitting there waiting to be taken. And there are other alternatives as well in terms of the way we refinance our debt. If you understand debt currency, then you understand that it's all basically backed by the willingness of people to do work in the future. So, for example, we could print money but do quantitative easing in another way. I would like to see a national bank. I'd like to see that national bank give every citizen a bank account. I'd like to see such a thing as a citizen's bond, where the public bank accounts that people can hold, which can only act like, which won't be a commercial bank ever. The government will take out a bond and pay interest on that to each member of public. So the people backing the currency that we're printing are the people who have to keep that currency afloat. So yes, I like to see the NHS well funded. If you're going to have a society that is doing anything, of value. It's about being happy and comfortable. I like to see people working less, but when they are working, they're doing something of value. For example, making people healthy. So we've moved a little bit too far in the realms of the free market. I'm all for free markets, but the government's supposed to be there to make sure the free market is to progress in good ways and innovate at the same time for the betterment of the people who live. Now we've got people rushing around doing things they don't understand, feeling sad, not having enough time because they're just rushed off their feet trying to get ahead and get ahead and get ahead and get ahead. And that's not really a healthy way of doing society. That's certainly not the society that you, when you send your children to school, that you try to tell them they're going to get involved in. But slowly we get dragged into it because we don't have a choice. That's the problem with currency. We don't have a choice. The banks can expand currency and retract currency, and every time they do that, a bit of everything you do gets taken away, and you have to chase harder and harder and harder just to have what you need. Or the people at the bottom half. That doesn't really affect us in Wokingham, but it certainly doesn't affect me. But my ethos for me is that since we are the wealthy, then we are the ones who should be making not sacrifice, changing the rules, so that people less fortunate than us have a bit of an opportunity. Right, TTIP. Oh, I hate TTIP, because if you understand currency, and the giant fraud that the way currency can be expanded and contracted, and $700 trillion worth of hedge funds and derivatives being in existence at the moment, that there is a massive leeching going on, and it's all leeching off to these little pockets. And sooner or later, let's say talk about property. Let's talk about houses. They're 30% owned by private landlords. Now, if things carry on as they are, if we don't make any changes, 100 years from now, I should imagine that every property in the UK is privately owned by an offshore entity. And there will be constant hemorrhaging of all wealth, and all of the state assets which we collectively own on an equal level, if you the way you visualise the state, all of the state assets will also be privatised. And so there'll be nothing left. Now, that's not a problem actually, because as a state, only we get to have a vote in our state. As a state, we're sovereign. We can actually say, no, we're having it all back, like the Americans did with gold in I can't remember, I think it was 1927 or 1930, but they just said, right, there is no private ownership of gold other than your earrings and bit. Give us all your gold. And so like that, we can actually say, or the state can, the people can vote and say, yeah, we're wiping out our debt, we're starting again. Everybody gets the same amount of land. That is plausible. But TTIP challenges that. The Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership is a comprehensive free trade investment treaty currently being negotiated, not by us it isn't, in secret, yes, between the European Union and the USA. One good thing about the European Union is I'm a little bit more comfortable with the French aren't going to take it. The French people are going to go burning down cities if this passes in this current form. So it can't pass with France involved. We'll just sit and take it because we're Brits. One provision would be potentially allow for private companies to sue the government if services that have been privatised are then repossessed, for example the NHS. How would you advise your party to approach TTIP? Well, one, I'm not in a party. And two, you guys get to decide. I think the public are universal. So what I would like to see, I would like to say no. That would be my preference if I was elected in such a way that I've commanded authority to say no. And then I would put that in my contract and I'd sign a contract and get your candidates to do that. If they're going to say no to TTIP, which they can't because it's not their choice, because they've had a situation where they can pass it on. But let's say you say, okay, right, one, when you turn up into government, you're instantly going to say, no, Parliament gets to decide whether or not TTIP happens. The EU membership, you could argue, was less important than TTIP because we didn't sign away our sovereignty. We didn't say, no, you can sue us for taking back things that are on our land. If we're going to give away our sovereignty in a way worse than the EU, then surely we should have a referendum. Surely. So, yeah, it's absolutely insane. I would say no anyway. As a minimum, any decent human being standing as a candidate should say, no, that should be a referendum amongst the people. It's a no-brainer. There is more sovereignty being lost with the TTIP. More sovereignty lost with the TTIP, and already all of the parties, was it 2 years ago? They had a massive, great big, the chamber passed, there will be an EU referendum. Now it's like, are we having an EU referendum? Don't vote for anyone who won't give you a referendum on TTIP. I've got 6 things to do, so the moment we get through the door, ideally I'd like to do all 7, because we've got to get that TTIP referendum passed ASAP, because it will be signed and you can't do anything about it. Wokingham's unitary grant. Wokingham receives the lowest unitary grant from central government of any usual authority in the in the country. As Wokingham's MP, what would you do about this, if anything? Well, yeah, probably I'm in the realms of if anything. You see, the costs that areas have are down to their Band D citizens generally. Those are the people who need help, and we don't have many of them. If you look at our banding, we're like, here's the dot for average. There you go. This is space. So this is the dot for average, and we're there for rich people. And this is the dot for poor people, and we're here. So we don't need as much money. So now the question comes, are you part of a society or not? Are you part of a global society? I am. I'm not sure that everybody in Wokingham is giving as I am regarding things like this, or as I say I am. Don't take what I say for granted. I'm just a person here. I could be lying to you. Make me sign a contract. I will. Make the other sign a contract. But the as a Wokingham MP, what you do for that? Nothing. I don't know that I could do anything. John Waywood, this is one of his only things that you could say that he's good for, is he knows how to walk into those and argue those cases. He hasn't argued in the past. So he's been off watch, as we know, because in 2007 he started his own wealth management company and then bet against you in 2008 when they moved into cash to watch everything crash. Shrink the economy, your cash ends up, shrink the capital, your cash ends up a bigger proportion of what there is. So yeah, he's been very busy, so I no wonder he's not done anything about it. And if he says he's going to do something about it, well, too late now, dude. But I personally wouldn't do anything about it. And there's other grants as well. We're getting an awful lot of money in for roads and infrastructure, which we shouldn't be getting. We should be getting that money from the developers who are paying far too little. If you're making £150,000 per dwelling just on planning permission changes, you haven't built anything yet. This is just a farm turning into something with a bit of land value to build a house on it. But we're only getting £26,000, and in the past we're getting £5,000. There's a whole history of, oh my gosh, anyone who's got a bit of land in there will get the right boys in the council and build. So yeah, we've got failing infrastructure because we've been handing people £100,000 to £150,000 per dwelling as profit beyond the profit of building that they should be getting. Okay, this crazy incentive to build here. So in terms of the unitary grant, yeah, we don't need it because we're rich, but also in terms of infrastructure that might contribute, we get infrastructure contributions from the government that add up to quite a lot anyway, although in my view they're just subsidising what we've been giving developers. Okay, question 4. A green Wokingham. What, if anything, is your vision for a green, sustainable, environmentally friendly community in Wokingham? Well, one thing I'm super happy with, although I'm not necessarily happy with the way it's been funded, is that the greenways. By the looks of it, the way the design is, pretty much everywhere in the borough you could cycle for less than a mile, get yourself into one of these cycleways and just stay away from the traffic, and then you've probably got a bit of a mile the other end to worry about. So that's a great thing. In terms of sustainable and green, this is all down to macroeconomics, not microeconomics. There is nothing in Wokingham. This is the other thing. You need to talk to your borough councillors about what you can do in Wokingham for the short time. This is the Localism Act in play. I have no control over this as an MP. Redwood doesn't have any control over this as an MP. And so if he says anything, then take that with a pinch of salt. It's the borough councillors. You'd have to speak to your borough councillors, who are pretty much all Conservative, handful of Lib Dems. But the Lib Dems fight the fight every time, and they're just outnumbered, and there's nothing much they can do about it, although I've not heard them arguing for more contributions. And then it's down to national government to decide whether or not they're going to let people win on appeal. So if you've got a developer crony making the appeal decisions, then there's no winning it. There is too much money to be made building houses on farms. If you increase the number of people entering the country or make it unlimited, then they will all flock to Wokingham, where the work is, and there is an incentive to build on every crook and nanny. So yeah, it's going to turn into Reading. There's nothing we can do, nothing I can do about it. Other than were I to be an MP and we introduce policies that would change that. One of those things would be to diversify wealth. At one point, until David Lee stood down as leader of the Wokingham Borough Council Conservatives, and therefore the head of the borough, he was also chair of the Thames Valley Business Partnership. That's basically concentrated on increasing growth in the Thames Valley. So if you're going to grow business in the Thames Valley, one of the richest areas anywhere, and get there more people working in the Thames Valley, then Wokingham's going to have less green space. So the question is whether or not you change the attitude to encouraging businesses to set up in areas where there's lots of people and not work, and you can try to get the best schooling contributions. Let's say these unitary grants, going to places where there are children who could be educated, take up work in deprived areas where there's already houses and there is people. So, in terms of a green Wokingham, that's the way I do it. We're doing quite well. We don't need to keep growing. We can't grow and keep our green spaces. That's one thing that's an illusion. And the other thing is the illusion that if you don't keep moving forwards, then you'll die. Because, that's ridiculous. Wokingham will die. Wokingham's been around for ages. Next time you hear a Tory councillor say, we've got to do this, or the town will die, they're talking utter rot, okay? It's a nice community of nice people. Everyone who ever says they love Wokingham, which I do, is because you kind of got that small town feeling. It's unfortunate that you can't allow too many people to be in that small town. We want to have lots of Wokinghams. I want lots of Wokinghams everywhere. Small enough to be a community and enough going on to be interesting. That's what we need. So to create new Wokinghams everywhere, we need to encourage businesses to be a bit more better distributed around the country. Skilled businesses, IT businesses. Yes, it will mean house prices in Wokingham will average out around the country. We won't necessarily be able to rent out our home in Wokingham and go and live in most countries that are hot just off the rental income and never ever lose out on it. So that's part of a fair society, I'm afraid. If you don't want one, then well, actually, as long as Wokingham doesn't want one, I'm still the guy to vote for. But if I had any control over the matter, that's the way to go. Inequality. Oh God. Tax avoidance. What measures would you propose if you were Wokingham's MP to reduce corporate and individual tax avoidance? Well, a lot. Were I MP and I in control of my decisions, and I've actually got a few listed. The main tax avoidance things that I see kicking about are, and they're fairly uncontrollable under the current terms, is basically you just set up entities. I've got a trust fund. When Zach Goldsmith says, well, my trustees are in control of it. I don't have control over how my money's managed for me. That's utter rot. If he wants to go and do something, he can. And so, you've got like the Zach Goldsmith who's avoided £180 million in tax when his father died, not having, I believed, done things that are particularly of use. He hasn't gone saving people's lives or anything like that. He made his money out of moving money. He gave a little bit back, but he gave most of it to his kids in manners that avoided tax. And for that, Goldsmith had non-dom status for a while. So Zach Goldsmith said, well, I haven't done anything wrong. I've paid all the tax I'm supposed to. But the reality is that the moment that you've been in a situation where you've been benefiting from an unfair tax system, as a decent human being who stood for Parliament, the first thing you do is you go and change those rules that you've benefited from. I'm not saying be a martyr and give out some of your wealth, but you look at the injustice, because if you don't play the injustice system, and I've got a trust for myself, then your children will be impoverished by the people who are playing the system. So yeah, play the system, but if you're going to go for being an MP, you've got to commit, make a contract, make a contract, because they're lying to you. Make a contract where you will commit to changing those rules which you are benefiting from. For example, I've got some property that I rent out, ex-council property. So, you could say that your average salary take home for someone might be the equivalent of someone who's born owning two rental properties that used to be council houses. Same income. I've born owning two houses in the UK. In the case, I actually have a British trust, but if my trust fund was in another country, and then that's it, fine, because there's unlimited capital controls. I can bring currency in, I can bring currency out. So, yeah, those there is someone potentially living in this country with a trust fund offshore, maybe owned by a company, where then they didn't have to pay any stamp duty buying the house unless they spent over £500,000. You didn't tend to spend over £500,000 on a rental property. So they didn't pay the same taxes as us buying the property. Our armies and our police are defending those properties from foreign invasion and local people disgruntled just taking it, squatters' right and whatever. They pay nothing towards this economy, and yet they own it. This is just fraud. It is outright fraud, and it should be illegal, and it shows you that you have got an institution that is corrupt. There's no alternative. When you've got the Libor and the Forex bankers who agreed illegal figures, wrong figures, to manipulate markets, and those very individuals weren't prosecuted and sent to jail, but given a little bit of a deal if they told, their manager must have known, and their manager, and how high did it go? But since those individuals who made, and they're known individuals who agreed the figures that were falsified, didn't go to jail, and then that it went up the hill, it pretty much proves beyond reasonable doubt that there is institutional corruption in the in those authorities charged with enforcing the law on banker fraud. So once that's pretty much a given, all cards are off, everything's off. So in terms of tax avoidance measures, I've got a few. If you go through my policy documents, if you go to kaz.loku.co.uk, somewhere you'll see my smart voter list, the first 6 that I've committed to, which are basically just about democracy and they don't cost anything. I've also put fracking on there. You've got those ones, and then you've got a load of ideas. If you get down about halfway, you're going to start looking at tax evasion and tax avoidance laws. And for example, a good one problem with wealth in property is that it is taxed by the person is taxed. So if they own it offshore, they can't get taxed on it. So I would just impose a tax on property that is not a primary residence. Now, if you can have a primary residence here, you're going to be a British citizen taxpayer, so that counts. If you're not primary resident to a property in the UK, then that property must either be rented out. So if you've got unoccupied property tax. The people have the right to buy their rental properties off these offshore institutions, and if you can't work out who the end owner is, because they're not declaring it, then you have a massive 10% tax on property that doesn't have a beneficial owner. So you either declare who you are, or you pay a lot of tax. A lot of people aren't up for that, because everybody unfortunately dreams of buying rental properties and not working. And that some people, it's always on the back of their mind, but you've just got to stop thinking, and then I'm going to do that when I retire. You'll be dead before this happens. Most people are dead before they get to that stage, and they struggle and they struggle and they struggle, just on the cusp, and then they die, and their children struggle and struggle and struggle. And that illusion, that hope of getting a quick buck, not working but being comfortable, is that dream is what's keeping 90% of people, keeping 10% of people very rich. You've got to give up the dream and aspire to work comfortably for a fair amount. Okay, right. Okay, inequality. Over the past 20 years, the gap between what the best and poorest remunerated people, I could have written this, in the country earn has grown enormously, as has the amount of the country's wealth that is now in the hands of the richest 1% of its residents. Does this concern you? Yes, because if you understand currency and you understand poverty, the way things work, assuming everybody's educated in a way that encourages them to work, the thing that then makes some people work stressed or give up, and other people go for positions of government, is the difference, is the wealth gap. The smaller the wealth gap, the fairer the economy, the more you encourage people at the bottom to do due diligence and not feel angry. You have a much happier society. You have a society that looks after one each other. And people aren't, well, I say that wrongly. People do get enormously jealous of other people being a little bit richer than them. But I think that might change, or changes a lot more, when you have genuine hope of doing it for yourself. You grow up in an environment where the get-rich-quick gang aren't there in front of you, and you're watching them going, why, God, look how clever he is. All he did was he put all his money into houses, it boomed, he took it out and put it into cash, then it crashed, then he put it into houses again. That's really clever. No, we need to take all of that profit. You shouldn't have capital gains tax that's lower than income tax. It's mad. Capital gains is the least productive action you can be doing, and the tax is lower. When you tax something less, you increase the money moving into that mechanism. So what we want to do is reduce income tax and increase capital gains tax and incur wealth tax. Stop people from hoarding that wealth. But that wealth won't just be on the person, it will be the wealth in the country. That's the way to do it. So I would say that, for example, and it will reduce the value of sterling, but someone has to start. Why not us? And we can do it incrementally. We can start so low that some people go, you know what, sod it, let's go for it. So what I would say is we would impose a tax on all UK assets. Place an allowance. So any UK citizen doesn't have to pay tax on that property that is part of the UK to the tune of 20 times median wage. So you get £1 million that is tax-free. So that starts the process rolling, whereby we start to tax people who aren't taxed by us owning property in this country. And the reason that should be fair is because it's our armies and our police force and our infrastructure that keep that property having a value, not being stolen, people being in a working environment in which they wish to use it. The only reason a house has value is someone might wish to live there. The only reason that house have value is that somewhere nearby there's someone running a business that the person who might want to visit occasionally wants to live there. So it's perfectly reasonable to tax the assets, the property and the assets within a country a little bit for the cost of protecting them. And if you take the taxation away from the person and place it on the asset, then that becomes fairer because that asset is protected by us and given value by us. So it should come back to us, bit by bit, incrementally, 1% at a time. So, you know, but we could drift there. We could get to 1% over 10 years. Let's just see how it goes. So, yeah, I would like to see a lower income tax. I think this whole banding system, do you know what, I'd probably just do it 35% from the bottom upwards. So you pay income tax even at the bottom, but you have a minimum wage, which is a living wage, and the living wage will be calculated in today's terms. I'd probably say it's about 15 quid. So we start moving towards the Scandinavian scenarios where you see countries where someone in McDonald's is earning $20 an hour. You go in and you go, oh my God, I paid $20 for my McDonald's, but actually kind of goes round and round and round. You eat less McDonald's, you know, what's wrong with that? So yeah, people go a bit slower, they ride the bike. We do have to slow down. Sorry, we do. The planet's running at 3 times its capability. If you look at, people think nuclear is the answer, but I've got 70 years worth of uranium left of known reserves. So yeah, let's just get green, let's just slow down. The first thing I'd like people to pass that could easily be passed would be a UK assets. So what the government, politicians all over the world, David Cameron especially, I've no doubt, do not want there to be a known register of assets. The Rothschilds especially don't want people to know how many trillions there is of gold or assets kicking about in their stocks. So the first step for me would be that you do have to have this declaration of all UK assets owned. Once that is in force, if anyone doesn't declare it, then it will be taxed at 10%. So either you're taxable in your own country or somewhere, but we can start seeing what the problem is. We don't know how big the problem is. We have no idea. But with 30% of property being privately owned by, we don't know who, bit rubbish really. Okay, so banking. Many of the major banks continue to act in ways that counter the public interest, rigging rates, encouraging tax evasion, etc. What would you do as an MP to improve? I'm guessing there's there's another page. So, one of my policies that I want people to let me pass would be to pass some of this into public control. So the scandal comes out, it gets reported, then a load of, then you see a pantomime where some lords or a couple of politicians who have been a bit feisty before they have a grilling, and someone gets grilled and that's the end of it, you know. So they have this pantomime. Let's get rid of that pantomime. One of the things I'm suggesting is if 100,000 members of the public sign a petition to call for something to go to jury by trial, there is then another sort of semi-jury by trial, but it's just a jury of 12 people who look at the information as presented and decide whether it's to go to a proper trial. But when they look at that information, they look at 2 things. They look at the crime that's been presented, and the people involved and whether or not those people should face a trial, but also whether or not the administrative staff who were required to deal with it in the first place should also go to trial for breach of duty. So that's where I do it. Let's start. We're not going to clean this up from the inside. You won't get me inside and manage to clean this up unless I've signed a contract telling you, okay, I'm going to pass that law. So yeah, cleaning up Westminster is going to take a long time. If you look at the financial changes since about 1979 and the Big Bang of 1986, but no tightening up of rules that were to be exploited when those things kicked in, it's so corrupt. It must be so corrupt. Okay. Okay, education. Wokingham State Schools have a very good reputation. Currently, more schools are being planned for Wokingham to meet the needs of our rapidly growing population. All of these are to be academies-free schools. What would you do as Wokingham's MP to maintain or improve education standards in the borough as this major expansion is undertaken? Well, I'd maintain them. They're good. What do you want? You know, I think our teachers are having a harder job than most. I don't know if you've ever worked with 30 children before, some of which are destructive. I would like to get Gove out of the equation. I think teachers should be nurtured by significant teachers in an environment. If a school is failing and you bring in one of those teachers who has a shown track record of making it work, and they can give that guidance. You encourage and nurture teachers, but if you start throwing pages and pages of things to tick at them, then if they've got a mind like mine, I'm quite instinctive, I'm very good with children, but if you gave me a book every time and loads of things to remember, I would lose that instinctive thing, and the children can feed off that. So I don't have anything against academies or free schools. We're running a bit of an experiment here, but that's how society progresses. Let's treat it like the experiment it is. It shouldn't be a damning experiment. There should be spare funds and almost like super staff ready to fly in if problems arise. The free schools work quite well because the local community decide to have a school, especially if the Department of Education buy a plot next to where that community came together and started founding a school. So those founders get in there early on, but when, like anything, you have a starting off community, and then that starting off community becomes a clique, and the next lot don't form a community in the same way. So it's all an experiment. We'll see how it goes. I don't think anything particularly needs to be changed on that front, although I would like the schools probably to be a bit better funded, but that means taxing people who evade tax and keep buying all our national assets and then making us pay tax that way too, collectively. 1.4 trillion pounds worth of debt, people. 1.4 trillion pounds worth of debt. And most of it we printed and we gave it to people to make us in debt to them. Brilliant. Right, housing. Oh, and it's all backed by children working in the future. Okay. 9. Housing. What will you do as Wokingham's MP to ensure there is adequate supply of housing affordable to nurses, early care teachers, carers and other low-paid but essential service workers in our community? Well, one, it's a difficult one. If we make housing... actually, no, housing would still be relatively expensive here if we did what I did, because it's still relative to the pleasantness and the affordable the jobs in the area. So one, we got down to that thing where we're going to make housing more affordable anyway by giving people the right to buy their their private home. This is something I don't think Wokingham residents would agree, but I would like that. So if you've lived in the house for 5 years, lots of little rules to make it that they can't just kick them out and get away with it. But ultimately, the main crux of it, if you live somewhere, paid your rent fairly for 5 years, you can say to the landlord, you know what, we don't really need you anymore. Pay you off. You pay some capital gain tax on your gain. I get the other half of the capital gain tax while I was living there. And we both pay the tax. So, you're renting accommodation, and while you're there, you're saving up your deposit. So that would be one way of making it so that rental properties are incredibly, the housing becomes far cheaper, because no longer is it literally a guaranteed perpetual intergenerational income. You get 2 houses for each child. That child never has to really work, ever. 2 child, so that's just crazy. I gather 1/3 of houses are private let, but that's not so true in Wokingham. Wokingham, we're full of people who own it, and there's not so many renters. But they are still, having said that, the price is still pushed up by people who wish to rent. Also, what I would like to see is encouraging people to work in areas where there are no work, encouraging employment in areas there are no work. So ultimately, and again, people might not agree with this, I like Wokingham, it's great. There is a balance. There is expansion and contraction. Contraction hurts, expansion feels good, unless you start getting squeezed. And we're into the realms of expansion and squeezing. So what we should do is try and hold it steady. We're not holding it steady. Homelessness. Wokingham's Food Bank has provided 659 food parcels to feed 1,750 people from all over 300 unique families in the past year. As well as helping the Salvation Army feed the homeless and Seafood Court feed struggling young people, do you see this as a problem? If so, what would you do as our MP to solve it? Well, so my view of charity is this, that charity is something that really shouldn't have to exist, because we have a giant charity called society. We have the welfare state. We decided when we became a society that we would not leave anyone behind, and the people who we collectively work and put into these other fair conduct. So there's 2 types of charity. There's charity who seek to change the way the government works because it's not acting in a fair manner. for example, animals. I'm not sure if there's charities who try to change the way tax by lobbying people on taxation or investigating individuals on their taxation. I would happily pay a little figure every month to someone who is going to follow a politician around who we know is corrupt or we believe is corrupt and has otherworldly work, and just sod it, do it illegally, listen to every conversation they say, don't let them get away with it. But so that's what I would consider a charity. But when you're feeding people who can't get food, that's not charity, that's failuring of society. So this comes down to minimum wages, benefits, and the way benefits are given. I don't want people to get handouts. So when I say handouts, I mean food bank handouts because they're starving, because they're trying this and they can't get a leg in. There's always something someone can do. And I've looked through the Green Party policies, and a lot of things in there I agree with, but one of them I really don't agree with is the citizen salary, where you basically get paid a living wage for doing nothing, and there doesn't seem to be any requirement that you do something. So I don't think that will work either. It's definitely not today, because do you know what? I would totally just sit and watch all the awesome television there is on a massive telly, because tellies are so cheap. I mean, you can buy the biggest, best telly there is at the moment for less than you can rent a house for a month. It's insane. So one thing that I have put in my list of things I would like to have is there would be a right to work and a need to work. So you would, I suppose, a bit like the Green Party's citizen salary, apart from you have to turn up to get it, basically. And if you really can't think of anything useful to do, people can move mud from one side of the road to another, and then they can move it back across. But I'm sure we can think of things that could be needed to be done. There's certainly a lot of old people who could do with a hand with their shopping. There's recycling. I don't understand why we've privatised the recycling services. I don't believe in privatising anything I consider to be a necessity. So yeah, why don't we have it so that people who don't have any work to do can work at the recycling centre for the right number of hours, and then they can come back and they can have their home and their food. I'm not sure that I believe in giving people money that they can spend on alcohol and drugs and cigarettes. There are people there who are their own worst enemies, and it doesn't solve the problem to give them that attitude that, well, I'm a grown-up, I can do what I want, when they haven't actually become a grown-up yet. They're just old children, as we all are, in fact, as we all are. But there is a certain sensibility that you earn from within society, and if you haven't got it, you don't get it. You get your needs met, and you're required to do a certain amount of work. But you should also have the right to a certain amount available to education. Now, obviously, if people are required to do work for their needs to be met, then we could call that slave labour. So I certainly wouldn't go the full hog. I wouldn't want people to be seeing their needs met for more than maybe 20 hours a week. And then, of course, we need to make sure that those people have the ability to train in something and become more senior and go beyond that basic minimum. But if somebody wants to work 20 hours a week for their needs met and then live the good life, the best things in life are free, good for you. Because we're working too fast and we need a few more people consuming a bit less and enjoying the beautiful world we have around us.